Hey Coffee and Crimers, I'm your host, Belle Fagan. I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with the term red flags. That's a term that is super commonly used today, especially on social media. We're taught what red flags to look for, mainly in relationships, to minimise our chances of either ending up in a miserable relationship or worse, a deadly one. Knowing the red flags means we can spot the green flags, right? Well, Carl Langdell appeared to be a walking green flag to Katie Locke. 23-year-old history teacher Katie scoured different dating sites trying to find her ideal partner, avoiding ones like Tinder because she did actually want something meaningful. So she settled on Plenty of Fish, which is a hugely popular UK dating site. In December 2015, she came across 26-year-old Carl Langdell's profile. Having ploughed through endless shady-sounding profiles, his screamed green flags. Carl apparently owned a legal practice, and his resume showed that not only had he done a degree in communications, but he'd also done an internship at one of Britain's largest newspapers, The Independent. He also had a blog titled Ordinary Decent Human, where he highlighted human rights concerns and centred on resistance against inequality. Ding, ding, ding. Green flags. And she even Googled all these facts, and his LinkedIn profile checked out. So she took the initiative and sent Carl a message. They chatted for about 2 weeks and finally scheduled a date for December 23rd, 2015. Devastatingly, by agreeing to that date, Katie Locke had no way of knowing that she had just signed her own death warrant. Now, having portrayed himself as a reasonably wealthy man on the dating site, he needed to keep up with that pretense. So he took Katie out to a hip East London pub, both of them having a great time. But Katie was smart, and she was well aware of the potential horror of dating stories. So she did what any smart girl does and took a picture of him and sent it to her friend and also let them know where she was. But even that wasn't enough to save her. Now, Carl actually drank himself into a complete vomiting mess, and yes, Katie was pretty tipsy herself, they'd had a good evening, but she was still way more in control than Carl was. And being the decent human being that she was worried. So she decided to accompany him back to the 4-star hotel in Hertfordshire that he was staying at. They got out of the cab, and the receptionist remembers that Katie was practically holding Carl up all the way to his room. He was a staggering mess. He wasn't feeling well still, obviously, when they got to the room. So Katie stayed with him. Like I said, she was a well-meaning, decent human, and she wanted to make sure that he was healthy enough to take care of himself. The receptionist also remembers Katie calling down and asking for a pair of toothbrushes to be delivered to their room. That was the last time Katie was ever seen. At some point during the night, Carl strangled Katie to death. Not only that, he also assaulted her dead body, and once finished, took pictures as a keepsake of his conquest, in inverted commas. Carl then went back to bed, sleeping in the same bed as Katie's dead, mutilated body, and then he discreetly disposed of her. The following day, on December 24th, Carl went about his normal routine without a care in the world. He went back to his parents' house and even took the family dog out for a walk. Now, while he was going about his day, Katie's family were obviously getting worried. She hadn't made it to her friend's house, who she'd agreed to house sit for, and this was completely unlike her. Plus, they couldn't get a hold of her. But thanks to the precautionary steps of her letting her friends know who she was with and where she was and sending Carl's picture to them, they were able to find him on Facebook. So they immediately messaged him, and he told them that at the end of the night she'd gotten into a taxi and he hadn't heard from her since. Now, they were still super worried, super worried, because this wasn't like Katie. So they actually figured out where Carl lived, and Katie's dad, Bill, immediately drove over there. Now, when he knocked on the door, Carl's mum answered and told him that Carl had taken the dog out for a walk. Bill was insistent on speaking to Carl and finding out exactly Katie's last movements. So she phoned him, and he confessed to the murder. This is where my jaw dropped, okay? Carl didn't even try to hide what a psychopath he was. He outright just came out to his mum and said, "I'm sorry to ruin your Christmas, but I killed Katie." And then he said, "I was going to tell you after Christmas, but I thought I'd wait. Basically, I had too much to drink and I strangled her." Now, that's when Carl's history of violence and sexual assault came to light. So let's take a deep dive because it uncovers a history of ignored symptoms and a man who, even though was diagnosed with an emotionally unstable personality disorder, along with narcissistic and antisocial traits, managed to inadvertently cheat the system. In February 2015, he had moved from his family home in Hertfordshire to Bristol to live with the family of his then girlfriend. The following month, he called a community psychiatric nurse and told her that he wanted to cut the throat of his girlfriend's sister, take off her clothes, see her naked, and assault her after she was dead. Now, the nurse believed that this threat was completely real, so she notified Avon and Somerset police. He then found out she'd reported him, so he called her back and threatened to slit her throat. Then the next call he made was to the police, and he told them that he was going to kill someone. Obviously, police arrived and arrested him under the Mental Health Act. At Bristol Crown Court on April 15th, 2015, Carl pleaded guilty. He was granted bail, but with some conditions, and that was that he needed to wear a tag and he had to move back to his parents' house in Hertfordshire, which he did on April 23rd. But, okay, this is a massive but, Avon and Somerset police didn't tell Hertfordshire police that Carl had been bailed to their area. So he wasn't even on their radar. And just a side note, in 2014, Carl had actually physically assaulted his own brother, but because his brother didn't press charges, it wasn't on Carl's record. On June 23rd, he was admitted to a mental health unit at a nearby hospital and then onto a trauma unit in London after a suicide attempt. He was discharged on July the 6th, but on July 27th, Hertfordshire police were called when he threatened to kill his then girlfriend's brother this time. But when they arrived, his girlfriend wouldn't cooperate with police or go into any detail, so it was just put down as a domestic dispute. Now remember, Hertfordshire police had no idea that Carl was on bail. Now the details of his convictions were on the National Police Database, but for whatever reason, they never ran his name after this incident. Had they done, things for Katie could have been very, very different. On August 1st, 2015, Carl was admitted again to the same mental facility for a second time after another suicide attempt. The doctor noted that his behaviour to women, fire setting, lying, and the threatening way he would speak to people was a concern, and there was also alleged sexual misconduct. 10 days later, a recommendation was made for him to be held under the Mental Health Act, and he was later transferred to the all-male ward in order to protect vulnerable females from him. Now, he stayed there as an inpatient until September the 20th. Okay, so it was from around August the 10th, 11th to September 20th, he was an inpatient, and then he was fully discharged altogether on October the 2nd. Even though 3 days before he was discharged, he told a psychiatric nurse, and I quote, "When I leave or I am discharged, I will kill someone. Document that. I will kill someone when I leave. You must document that." Okay, let's just take a moment. He said that and he was still discharged? Okay. Hospital staff did report that to the police, but again, there are so many buts. It wasn't formally recorded as a crime because, wait for it, his doctor said that the threat was probably, in inverted commas, made in the context of Carl just being anxious about his discharge meeting, which was scheduled for the next couple of days. Okie dokie. Now, 3 weeks before his date with Katie, on December 2nd, he had to go back to Bristol for his trial. He was actually given a 9-month suspended sentence for the threats that he had made and 12 months mental health treatment. Now, had the police and the mental health units in Hertfordshire and the police and probation services in Avon and Somerset talked to each other, the ruling the judge in Bristol made could well have been very different. Obviously, we will never know. I just can't see how they wouldn't have been different. So for anyone keeping count, over the 9 months before Katie's murder, 5 different organisations came into contact with Carl. But as we've seen, there was a serious breakdown in communication. On December 3rd, 10th, 17th and 21st, he was seen by his offender manager, who reported that she didn't see Carl as presenting a risk to her or anyone else. I honestly feel sick. Like, why wasn't more done? Could more have been done? I honestly don't know. My heart just literally hurts that 2 days after meeting with his offender manager, he had that fateful date with Katie. Okay, so let's go back to the part where he told his mum. Obviously, she didn't want to believe it, but he insisted that he had. So she did contact authorities and he was arrested. Initially telling them that it had been an accident, but finally admitting to the truth. He'd wrapped her body in bedsheets and put her body by bushes on the ground of the 4-star hotel. Police also found the pictures that he had taken as keepsakes, even though he had tried to delete them. And sickeningly, when being interviewed by police, he said that Katie didn't even put up a fight. He'd expected her to hit out, but she didn't. On the 3rd of June 2016, Carl was sentenced to 26 years without parole. Initially in a high-security psychiatric hospital, and then later in HMP Wakefield, which is a Category A high-security prison for males that basically pose a threat to society. Except, on February 11th, 2021, at the age of 31, he was found in his cell after slitting his own throat. Now, he was still conscious, but efforts to save his life were unsuccessful. In the weeks leading up to his death, he'd stopped taking his meds and was refusing to cooperate at his regular mental health reviews. And 3 days before his death, he was actually asked if he'd be willing to have any input in the coroner's inquest into Katie's death. He refused, and then 3 days later took his own life. Now, this case is just an entire mess. I honestly believe it only happened from the multiple mistakes made by public agencies. I'm not condoning anything that Carl did. He was obviously a very sick, tormented man. But had these public agencies communicated with each other, done their due diligence, things could really, truly have been different for Katie. As always, I truly appreciate your support, and if you'd like to leave a review, that would mean the world. Also, if you'd like to be part of our community, you can head to the website linked wherever you've gotten this podcast from. Head to that website and click on the private Facebook group.